I think it's about one, probably topped out at about $1.4 trillion of U.S. bonds, U.S. government. So effectively, they had loaned the American government $1.4 trillion. That's fallen in half now. Everybody's backing away. Everybody knows the United States government is the biggest debtor in the world, and it does not have the, we're going to have $2 trillion deficit just this year. It doesn't have the means.
Quick break from the program to share with you something amazing. This is called Sloop. It's actually SLUPP-332, but it's been shortened to Sloop. And this thing mimics exercise. It seems too good to be true. I first shared this on my Substack, and I had Dr. Diane Kaiser, and we went through all the benefits of this, and the whole thing sold out. You can't get it anywhere really across the industry. And the people who are using it the most are athletes and bodybuilders and people who want to see extra performance in athletics, because this and preclinical studies with mice increased their endurance by 70% and their distance by 45%. I mean, it's incredible. And it's been shown to mimic exercise even when you're at rest. In preclinical studies with obese mice, they lost upwards of 12% of their body weight in 4 weeks, and it increased muscle. So this is really taking the industry by storm. It's actually not that expensive either. With my 10% coupon, it's about $80 for maybe a 2-month supply if you take 1 capsule a day. If you decide to up it to 2 capsules a day, because your dosage depends on what you want, then it's a 1-month supply. But Dr. Diane recommends doing 1 capsule a day until your body gets used to it. You might not see the same level of results right away that the mice did, but your body can get used to it and see if it's something that you really want to do. If you are interested in this, I will have a link below so you can try it yourself, or go to sarahwestall.com under shop. Remember to use the code Sarah to save 10%. Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall. I have Charles Goyette coming to the program. He's an award-winning author, and he also has, he had a radio show for years in Arizona, and he was an award-winning radio host there. But he has a new book out called The Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole. And so we're going to talk about lies that the empire has told us over the years when it comes to wars. And he's also going to talk about the media, and he's going to bring up specific people who are still active in the media and the lies that they told and how profound it was. And maybe you'll be surprised with some of these people, and maybe you won't. But the important thing isn't so that we just point out people. The important thing is, well, I don't care if somebody's that big of a liar. I don't care if we point them out because they deserve to be exposed. The important thing isn't necessarily exposing the people as much as exposing the operation and how it all works and why it continues and why we're in such a sludge mess that we're in. And the people are asleep. A lot of people are waking up. But the more people that know, the more you can hold people to an account. And I know nobody trusts anybody anymore. And that's because of this crap. It's because we've been so scammed and we've been taken advantage of. And I got to tell you, my website was down for the last couple days, and it's because it's up now. It's been up I didn't have a show on Tuesday because I was dealing with my website issues, and now it's up. It's been up for a couple days, and it has to do with my affiliation with John Mark Dugan. He helps me a little bit with some of my website stuff. And so it's a long backstory of how my site got taken down. But for those of you that don't know who he is, he was a sheriff deputy in Palm Springs, Florida, and then he stopped doing that and helped whistleblowers. And as part of that whistleblowing thing, I mean, he came on my show a few times, many times actually, and talked about some of the things that he was involved with, which is just incredible. But one of those is that the detectives on the Epstein case gave him all the files, all the videos, and for safekeeping, because they didn't trust that the FBI would keep them safe. And so he has all these Epstein files, and MI6 tipped off the Times of London, and they printed it in the Times of London that he had all these files. I had him on my show to talk about it. So you can find that show if you go to sarahwestall.com and just search for John Mark Dugan. You'll see there's a lot of interesting shows I did with him. But that was one of them, and we talked about, well, who was actually in these videos. Maybe I'll put it up on my Substack as well, sarahwestall.substack.com, and you can see it. I'm behind a little bit on my Substack because of my website issue and some projects I'm working on. But that being said, you should be able to find a lot of things there. My website went down. We got it back up, and what they're saying is that these files are being used as blackmail tools for the Russian government, and they probably are. But I don't know if they're coming from his files. His files were sent to 8 different people for a dead man switch, so they wouldn't take them out. But I'm sure the files are being used by foreign governments as blackmail because the intelligence agencies were involved, but there's probably more than just Mossad involved. There's probably every single intelligence agency of every country that has the ability to have one because spies were involved everywhere. And once this information gets leaked out, it's leaked out. And so these videos that are out everywhere probably are being used to blackmail people. And it's a much bigger situation. So I talk about this with Charles in this interview of how insidious this is. You know, I had a series of interviews with James Rothstein, Detective Rothstein, and he has taken down more pedophiles in this country than anybody has. His whole story, I did a whole 6 series with him, very well respected in the intelligence world. And I pulled into his driveway. I did an on-site 6-part series with him, and he taught me so much. At the beginning of when I was doing this, I was just like 3 years in, and he said, Sarah, this is the Epstein's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this is how it all operates. Everything is about blackmail and human compromise. That's how they control people. And that's what we talk about in the show too, about Venezuela, how, the Maduro situation, the regime changes. We talk about how that all ties in. And so I'm getting caught up into it a little bit. I guess whenever you're just surprised, whenever you're in these kind of situations, you are just never ending about what we're tied into. And the more truthful you are, the more you're trying to do your job, the more problems you have. You just get to that point where like, wow, how much do I want to, get involved in some of these things? Because it's just so crazy what you have to deal with. But it's important, I think, to tell you the truth so that you can make decisions for your family. I think it's important that there's more people that are working to tell the truth. And I think we have that. I think there's a whole network of people who are with these podcasts and independent forums where people are just working to restore basic dignity in amongst humans. And we don't want people like that, running our world. Let's say, okay, fine, we have a world council of elders, which is what they want to get to. Do we want these people? Do we want people who operate like this being our elders? I mean, really? I mean, is that how we operate our planet so that we're better? I don't know. I think it's time that we step up and say, we want something better for our country and for our families. And because if you just go and hide in your own rabbit hole saying, okay, I don't want anything to do with anything because I can't make a difference, then for sure we're in trouble. If everybody does that who are good, we are really in trouble. The people who are really looking out for the next generation, if they all do that, we are in trouble. Okay, so before we get into the show again, I need to remind you that you need to protect your assets. The country is barreling down into this craziness. Silver and gold has gone up substantially over the last year. It's because our economy is in the process of resetting. We're probably in the middle of it. We've been talking about this for years, but it's here and we're seeing the craziness. And so I recommend that you at least protect what assets you can in gold and silver and have, spread it out. Make sure your assets are distributed in different places so you can spread out the risk, but you should have some in gold and silver. And I use Miles Franklin because you can trust them. And they've shown that you can trust them because they've been helping people with getting out of these scam IRAs. I just had somebody come in a couple days ago who had invested over $400,000 of their IRA. And it's still only worth $176,000 right now. That's after gold and silver has gone up at least twice. Silver has gone up 3 times, and it's only worth $176,000. And she put in 400. That's a clear indication of being scammed. And this is happening. And this is where Miles Franklin is different. Not only will they help you get out, I've had hundreds of people go to them, and they've been helping people get out of their scams. They treat you like a sophisticated precious metals buyer. You will get the same prices. If you talk to them, you will get the same prices that somebody who is sophisticated at buying precious metals get. They will give you the same premiums, and you're not going to get hosed. It's not like a different company that says, okay, this is a retail buyer. They have no clue what they're doing. They've never bought precious metals before, so we can gouge them. We can completely take advantage of them. We can sell them on coins that have crazy markups, and they get screwed. And we take this profit and we siphon out their life savings, which is what that example really is. But they won't do that to you. They're going to treat you like a professional buyer, and they're going to give you the best prices in the country with the lowest premiums. But to get access to that private price list, which they do not make public, you need to fill out the form. Go to sarahwestall.com/milesfranklin, fill out that form, and you will get access to their private price list. Also, if you've been scammed on IRA, do the same thing. Fill out that form and they call you, and you will deal with the most professional people who have the same ethics and morals that I do and that Andy Scheckman has, and you will be treated with respect. And that means you'll be treated like a professional does. You'll get the best premiums and that you won't be scammed. And that's what you want to look for, right? Because not all of us have a ton of experience buying precious metals. So you want to go to somebody that you can trust. That being said, you always want to check everything that you're buying, right? Get in the habit of being a responsible person with what you buy. Okay, go to sarahwestall.com/milesfranklin. Okay, let's get into this really interesting conversation I have with Charles Goyette.
Okay.
Hi, Charles. Welcome to the program.
So great of you to have me on, Sarah. Nice to meet you, and I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Well, I'm sure this is going to be an excellent conversation for the listeners, and because you have so much deep insight. You've been writing books. You have a military background. You have a strong media background. You seem to be pretty aligned with me as far as libertarian leaning. I'm not so hardcore libertarian where I become an anarchist. I'm more just what our founding document was libertarian leaning, right? I mean, that's kind of our whole country was libertarian leaning.
I'm the same way. I believe that you own you, I own me. So, okay, let's move on through life. I won't tell you how to act and what to do. And I know you won't tell me. And we're free people, and that's what makes us prosperous. And so if we want to continue being prosperous, we should continue being free, right?
That's right. And free, I think, is used so often. It's used by people who are the ones implementing the least free kind of principles. And they always talk about freedom and freedom of speech. It's like, well, you guys are working to shut down freedom of speech. I saw you in all the congressional hearings, and all you were anti-freedom of speech, but now you're using freedom of speech as a way to fight for your own freedom of speech. Well, I sat and listened to you in Congress, and all you wanted to do is shut down everybody's freedom of speech.
Yeah, deplatform people, shut down their freedom of speech, no speech unless it agrees. We all have to be on the same page, otherwise you're not allowed to speak. It's been a very weird time in American history, and I think it's a repudiation of the entire, American heritage, and it's happening right before our eyes. It's it's that old Chinese curse. You live in interesting times. It may not be the best of all possible worlds, but at least we get to have a front row seat to what's monumental changes that are taking place, not for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people have no idea the profound implications to shutting down our freedom of speech is. I mean, I don't think people quite grasp how big of a deal that is.
Yeah, it's the marketplace ideas. It provides for innovation. It provides for creativity. It provides for growth and new opportunities, and it lodges in each individual human being a certain sense of importance that they have something in the world to express. I have very, very strong views about a lot of things, and I think you and I will agree about almost all of them, if not all of them. But one thing I've learned in my my hair's white. One thing I've learned in my long lifetime is there's a reason for every point of view. That doesn't mean that every point of view is right, but there's a reason that people hold those views, even if their experiences are different or wrong. And the best you can do is let them express them and then work them out in the marketplace in exchange of ideas.
Yeah, because if you shut it down, then it creates this animosity, and it's like this thing ready to blow. Yeah. And that you have to let that flow of ideas come forward. But I would say that it actually puts your life and the life of your family members at risk by not having access to information, especially when you're starting to talk about how to prepare for whether you need to get prepared your assets, if things are going, war is coming, or if your family member is sick and you don't have access to the best medical care in the world, you're stuck with whatever makes the most money for the local money-making machine. And then if you don't have access to information, they feed you with information saying this is the best you're going to get, when it really is pretty piss poor.
I should say, if you look at Americans alive now, we have been, let's call it what it is, right? We have been lied to by the state from the beginning. I think that the inflection point was the Kennedy assassination. They lied to us about that, slowly over the course of unknown years. The material's been coming out, and we've learned definitively how much they have lied to us about what they knew in the relationship with Oswald. Over and over again, we get, with each new document dump, we're learning more and more, but we were lied to about that. We were lied to about the Vietnam War. We were lied to about weapons of mass destruction. We were lied to about COVID. We were lied to about the Jeffrey Epstein stuff. They have been lying to us consistently. And to me, Sarah, it's a little like the American people have been Stockholm syndrome victims. They at the time Kennedy was killed, everybody bought the story. 87% of the people overseas outside of America, they didn't buy any of this nonsense. They were told about lone gunmen. And, Jack Ruby killed Oswald because he was afraid that Jacqueline Kennedy would have to suffer through a trial, and he didn't want her to have to do that.
Right.
And that's why this mobster, mob guy
killed
her. But but the American people bought all of that stuff. Well, they don't buy it anymore. They know that they're being lied to over and over. WMDs, what WMDs? Yet they've kind of resigned themselves to it, I'm afraid. In many cases, there are the outspoken like yourself and myself, but for the most part, people kind of roll their eyes. Yeah, they're lying to us again, but they've, these are our captors, and there's not much we can do, and this is the system, and who else you're going to elect, and so on and so forth. And so it goes on. And the point of my book really is, if you don't start valuing the truth in this country, if you don't start demanding the truth, if you don't start, if everything is forgotten, you have no sense of where you've been, you have no sense of where we're going. And that is not a good thing.
Well, and that gets back to our topic of the freedom of speech that I just brought up at the beginning. And I want to get into the lies of war, because you wrote a book on that. But the point is that if you're not the voices who are telling you the truth historically have been shut down. With the Kennedy assassination, you can go to issue after issue after issue, and they amplify the lies, and anybody that's telling truth is being shut down. And then they went even further with this last iteration of just deplatforming people that were giving you different insights on this. And I know you are not a Boy Scout when it comes to being shut down yourself and being persecuted for giving people correct information. When it comes to the fog of war, it can cost you your life. And if you don't have this information, then the people can't push back, can't resist, can't change our outcome. And we are really overall all victims of whatever's thrown upon us.
It's such a weird system, this kind of mental prison that enforced consensus, places on us. In my long media career, I remember a time, this particular instance has changed now, but for a very long time, if you talked about something like, I guess like the Kennedy assassination, in the mass media, in the big networks, the newspapers, the columns and stuff, you got marginalized. It was unspoken. Nobody had to tell you. Everybody knew. Nobody compared notes about it. Everybody knew that, if you become, you'll be a conspiracy theorist. Maybe they'll put you on the overnight show, or stuff. But you could really hurt your career by talking about things that, should have been talked about a very, very long time ago. And I'll give you a reason why I say
and
that's
it's important. True, right? It can be absolutely true,
exactly.
And you destroy your career. Yeah, go ahead.
Destroy your career. Well, in the case of the Kennedy assassination, and I know that's old history for a lot of people, because most people listening now, most people in our country now weren't even alive for it. But in the case of the Kennedy assassination, if the American people had been allowed to have some sense that they were being misled by the government about it, and they were, a year later, no, in fact, less than a year later, in August of '64, so I guess 10 months later, there was an incident off the coast of Vietnam called the Tonkin Gulf. It's called the Tonkin Gulf Incident. And so we opened fire on, LBJ said, we don't know what we were firing on. Maybe we were firing on whales. But it was a phony incident. The commanders on the scene said, radio men got some bad information. They immediately repudiated that some sort of attack had happened on America. Nevertheless, the administration immediately used that pretext that had already been disavowed, took it to Congress, and they had passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which gave the president, LBJ, authority to conduct a war that claimed certainly at least 2 million Vietnamese lives and 58,000 American lives at enormous cost, at a cost that was so high that it led to the stagflation decade of the 1970s.
Well, and that led to the first, people just, the Vietnam War, and then all the soldiers came back, and it was a horrible cultural situation.
It was really bad, and yet all it would have taken to remediate that is for the people to have learned the truth about Kennedy in advance.
All they had to do was know it, and the fact is that our people perish in the dark is. If that's not an indication of that, if you're not, that's how important this is and how many lives can be saved or lost by not having access to this information so that the general consciousness of the people can exert itself.
Yeah. And just to give you a couple of examples from the book to fast forward to modern times, for example, in the Iraq War, in fact, let me give you this example because this is almost humiliating for the United States. The Iraq War was launched in March of 2003. I think it was 6 weeks, maybe 2 months before the Iraq War. A group of Iraqi expatriates living in America came to the White House to visit with President Bush and talk about, what would happen after the invasion, the lay of the land, something that the administration notoriously was not prepared for. And the result of that was very bloody carnage for a very long time. But they came to the White House and they're visiting with President Bush about the makeup, the constituency of the Iraqi people. And he goes, Sunnis, Shiites. Well, I thought Iraqis were all Muslims.
Oh,
this is the president of the United States 6 weeks or so before launching a huge war, and it went on and on and on. And the examples are so they're so shameful.
Bad.
Oh, it's pathetic, and that's not some internet meme that I found on the internet someday. I have that from a United States ambassador.
So you think that half of what, maybe even more, is just pure incompetence, pure stupidity?
There's a lot of stupidity, but there's some really dark motives in the background.
I know.
Speaking of the Iraq War, in the Iraq War, somebody went to the trouble to forge documents that said that Saddam Hussein was buying nuclear precursors, yellow cake uranium, from Niger. And the documents were forged. And a high school kid with Google could have figured it out in 15 minutes.
See, that's where the stupidity comes in.
Of course, it was totally fraudulent. But you have to ask yourself, who has the motivation to forge and circulate throughout the international intelligence community documents that will lead us into war? And you got me on a roll now. I'll tell you one or two more, but I want to tell you this one because this is so shameful. It's during the first Gulf War, the American people weren't really convinced that they wanted to go send their young men and women off to die, their fathers and brothers and children. And in that war, they weren't convinced. And Bush the elder kind of wavered on it for a little bit, and he didn't know. And Margaret Thatcher said, "Oh, you can't wobble, George. You got to go to war." So they tried to sell the war to the American people, and the American people still weren't convinced. And I'll tell you why. One of the reasons they weren't convinced is because while we were talking about sending the American youth off to fight to liberate Kuwait from Saddam Hussein, the royal family, the Al Sabah family, was jetting off to Switzerland to go disco dancing.
Oh, jeez.
And so, but anyway, at the time, trying to gin up support for it, the White House finally figured out something that would motivate Americans to get behind the war, and that was, threat to our oil supply. Our economy collapses. Saddam Hussein's going to roll into Saudi Arabia. He's going to shut down Saudi Arabian oil. We're going to be at his mercy for the rest of our lives. America's industrial economy will come to a grinding halt, and we'll all be poor and huddled in the dark, freezing to death. And that was the story. And they said, and this came from the vice president, they said there are 250,000 Iraqi troops on the border of Saudi Arabia. They've moved in and they're ready to roll in. And they said, and I don't remember the number of tanks, but it was like 25,000 tanks or whatever it was. Well, that's a pretty formidable threat.
That's right.
There was a lone reporter a woman, I think her name was Jean, somebody at the St. Petersburg Times, and she said, "Well, that's curious." So she got her publisher to give her $3,200, and that's a lot of money for a tiny little newspaper. She got $3,200, and she rented satellite time on the overhead surveillance satellites. And then she hired American, satellite imagery analysts. And she had them taking pictures of the border of Saudi Arabia to show the pictures of all these 250,000 Iraqi soldiers and 25,000 tanks. Guess what?
No.
Zero, zip, nada, nothing there.
Wow.
No roads, no logistics, no support to get them to support them there. No, nothing. The satellite imagery was good. You could see what was going on in Saudi Arabia at their airport and elsewhere in Iraq. Nothing there. That's a pretty serious fib. So she started contacting Cheney's office, the White House, and so on. And they refused to really answer, and they just said, "Trust us." And the story slipped right down the memory hole. So I mean, we've been subject to this stuff so long, so continually that when people are just sort of resigned, they lied to us. What are you going to do about it?
Just a short break from the program to share with you an amazing peptide to help you lose weight. It's stronger than Ozempic. And why? It's because it not only reduces your appetite, but it also burns fat. These other GLP-1s on the market, they do not burn fat. They just reduce your appetite. This one, retatrutide, is stronger. It's considered a next generation peptide because of that. And man, does this work. I've been using it for 2.5 weeks and I've already lost 11 pounds. And I cut my dose in half because I was losing weight too quickly. And that kind of freaked me out, to be honest. And so I also am taking this 5-amino 1MQ in capsule form. This helps by making sure that you lose fat, not muscle. And so in conjunction, I'm using both of these. This will work whether you have this or not. And I am telling you, it's amazing. If you are interested in getting this, I have the link below, or you can go to sarahwestall.com under shop. You can use the coupon code Sarah to save 10%. If you have questions about your own use, you should either consult your doctor or you can join Dr. Diane's tribe. And I have a link below to that. It is only $1 for the first week. You can ask her any question you want and get all your answers to this, how to take an injectable. And there shouldn't be any fear in doing that. It is easy and straightforward. Go to sarahwestall.com under shop or use the link below. And remember to use coupon code Sarah. And that's sad, as long as if you're acting on it. This is where people's lives come into play. Now let's talk about something really current, the Epstein situation. My website was just taken down. I've been hacked for the last couple of days. It's up again, but that's because I'm pretty sure it's in my association with John Mark Dugan, who I've had on my show many times, and he helps me on occasion with some of my website stuff. And he has all the original Epstein. He was a whistleblower and a sheriff deputy in Palm Springs, Florida, where Epstein was. And when he was there, the local detectives gave him all the Epstein files, and he was storing them on his servers. And he ended up getting asylum in Russia. And MI6 tipped off the Times of London that he had all the videos. And what I'm hearing now is that the people are worried, and this is probably absolutely correct that this is happening, that they're worried that not just his videos, but probably leakages from all over the place, because the FBI has all those videos too, that high powers like Russia and China are blackmailing our country and members of Israel and City of London, and all these people using these files. So they got hold of them, and there's players on the international scene that are using it to blackmail, not just Jeffrey Epstein's circle. And that's why I was targeted, or why John Mark Dugan was targeted through. And then I got taken down as part of it. What do you think of that? Do you think that is really the backdrop of this? Is it got out of the hands of the original blackmail circle? Now it's in the hands of all sorts of people, and they got a frickin' mess on their hands.
Nothing, Sarah, nothing surprises me anymore. And I'm not an expert on that, but I would not be in the least surprised. I remember, for example, was widely reported during the Monica Lewinsky-Bill Clinton affair that Mossad had tapes of their phone sex. and we're using it against Bill Clinton. So this stuff goes on the other. A story just hit the New York Times. The New York Times, it's always too late when they report the story. They get to it years later. But the New York Times had a story just this week that reported about the Nixon Watergate stuff, and it turned out, this is the deep state at work. It turned out that the Joint Chiefs of Staff had a Navy enlisted guy who was rifling through the desks of the Nixon National Security Council, stealing documents from the briefcases of people like Kissinger and Haig, photocopying stuff, going through burn bags, gathering stuff, because the Pentagon did not agree with the policies of the elected officials, the ones that the American people elected, whether you like them or not, or agree with them or not. They were going through, and so they were on a mission to subvert the elected government. Well, in America, we don't allow that. We don't allow the CIA to subvert the elected government, although they've done it many times.
I think that's what's happening. Yeah,
sure.
I think that's what's happening currently.
Yeah. And in this case, it was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Thomas Moore, and others that they had 5,000 documents during that period delivered to them in this effort to subvert Nixon's idea of opening China, Vietnamization, and things like that. So nothing you tell me will make my eyebrows arch.
Well, yeah, it's because I think history is a learning lesson for the future, right? It doesn't match, but it rhymes. And then it teaches you patterns so that you can start to see these patterns in your current situation. Because we are in an information war, right? We really are. The battle zone is online, a lot of it, just in the minds and the psychology of the people to try to get them, they want to win, the art of war, you win without firing a bullet kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about some of the current things that are happening. Minneapolis, I live in Minneapolis area, and so I saw just how out of control, how much they're exaggerating what's actually happening here. Mm-hmm. And if you were going to take down or take in custody illegal immigrants, let's say you're taking in hundreds of thousands. I think they took in like 200,000 so far. If even 1% of the mistakes, even a fraction, 0.01%, you make a mistake on, and you apprehend a citizen instead of somebody, that you just misidentify people and things, it's going to happen where you're doing a mass operation and you're dealing with criminals, you're dealing with traffickers, and you're dealing with the majority are just people trying to make a living. But there are a percentage of bad guys in here, like really, really, really bad guys. You're going to have agents on edge because they know that this is who they're going after. You're going to have false identities because they just don't know. So let's say it's 0.01% of the people are apprehended. That could be 300 people, right? If you wanted to make it look like it was all, I don't know what is the truth behind all this stuff, but if you wanted it to make it look one way or the other, you really could, because 300 people is enough evidence where you could blow it into being, they're just total tyrants taking people down. It could be, you could make it any way you wanted from a media narrative.
They've handled it, and by they I mean the government has handled it so very badly. First of all, they lost control of the spin, and it's like a medical emergency, a big car crash or a train wreck or something. And when the medical professionals get there and the ambulances get there, they go through a triage thing. Okay, this guy broke his arm. He'll be okay. He'll live. But this other guy is bleeding profusely. We treat him first. You got to separate the stuff. Yep. And so the idea always was that, we want to get rid of the psychotics. We want to get rid of the criminally insane. We want to get rid of the killers, the murderers, the rapists. We want to get rid of the drug dealers. We want to get rid of all the people that are victimizing the American people. Yep. But they lost the narrative. They didn't keep insisting on that. They didn't keep describing the triage. They've gotten a little better lately, but during the first few months of this thing, so when the media, always running to the left, they saw, a 39-year-old nanny from a household gets arrested and the 6-year-old kid's kids left on the lawn with no nanny. Oh, that's the story of the day. But the administration didn't focus on the triage that, we're starting at the top. We're starting with the worst of the worst. But that's only one side of it. And you've got to be holistic. There's profit and loss, assets, liabilities. The other side was always that they had to do something to remove the magnet, like the welfare magnet and things that were bringing people into the country. And it's hard for the American people to believe that there are entire cultures, that their national ethos doesn't have anything to do with ours. We believe in, your property is your property. We don't steal your purse. And, we give fair value for fair value. And we all have to earn our way. And we have to serve other people to earn our living. And we do all of those things. Your property is sacrosanct, and I'm not going to steal your bank account. So maybe not even all Americans agree with those fundamental principles. And maybe that's being diluted day by day. But there are entire cultures that don't subscribe to any of those. They think that the best people are the people that sharp, that steal, that work around, that ignore the rules and enrich themselves. So, the American
That's a
people
profound statement, by the way, is what you just said. I don't think people realize that that's true. That's an accurate statement, what you just said. There's people who simply don't go with our values, and stealing and cheating and lying is actually valued.
It's success. And so so on the one side, you've got agents out there trying to get the worst of the worst. The other side, though, Congress refused. I think it was just last week, Rand Paul had a measure in there to cut $5 billion of welfare spending on illegal immigrants. $5 billion is nothing in our current economic straits. And it was voted down by the Republicans. It was voted down. So you've got to get control from both sides. You've got to get control of the things that draw people here, believing that they can come here and live at the expense of the American people, and they don't have to support themselves, they don't have to work, and that they'll have a free ride for everything from now on: free housing, free cars, free this, free that. And on the other side, you got to start at the very top. So I think it's been very badly managed, and it suits the needs of the kind of the lapdog press to have the nanny get arrested, and it suits the need of the lapdog press to talk about how cruel Rand Paul and those people must be. They want to cut the welfare benefits out from the people that want to come to this country to live forever free at the expense of the American people.
That's just so crazy. The fact that they would even question the living for free thing is just insane.
How about funding transgender operations for people in prisons overseas? The more you look at it, the worse it gets.
Although I look at something like that, and I think it could be a cover for a different. When it gets really, really stupid, I start thinking it's a cover for an black op, and getting the money flown in.
Yeah, you never know where the money really goes.
I think. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
No. I was saying that I think that they've gotten away with it for so long. They put the dumbest thing they possibly can and then laugh about it. I think it's that bad.
Well, they've gotten away with so much of this sort of thing culturally for the United States. It's become very, very destructive. They have persuaded people that live at the expense of other people. They've persuaded people that get benefits for generations now. And I'm not just talking about the recent influx of 20 million immigrants or whatever it may be, but even for the Native American people, we have the term entitlements. So we give them things, and they're called entitlements, and they're entitled to them. So it's gotten to the point, the reason it's almost impossible to roll any of this stuff back, or here on the verge of national bankruptcy with a national debt that we cannot hope to repay, on the verge of that, you can't trim those back, because we have convinced people over the course of generations that this is their property. They are entitled. So if somebody comes in to tighten down, to clean up, to get a handle on it, get it under control, to audit it and stuff, they go ballistic, because it's as though now we're coming in to steal their property.
Yeah,
it's very bizarre.
Well, the entitlement thing is actually very difficult, because it turns people into children, right? And I've had experts and people who work with the indigenous, the tribes and stuff, and there's the average normie people in the tribes, and then there's other people that are like, we are enslaved. We are like treated like children. When it comes to healthcare, what comes with these entitlements also comes with our strict obedience. And so we have to do all these things. And So there's hopefully a growing wedge going on in those communities as well, as people start to realize we might have entitlements, but we are slaves to this system.
Yeah. It's I'm from Arizona and I grew up with playing basketball after school with Navajos and Hopis, and I knew quite a bit at the time about what was going on the reservations. As somebody famous said, it was a cabinet member, I think, of Reagan, said, "You want to see socialism at work? Go to the reservations." That's
That's right.
exactly what it is, and it was dire and it was grim, and yet we're all being ushered into the national federal reservation, in which we're the property of the state and we have to go along to get along. And if you don't, then this is how states control people. We use these sanctions on countries all over the world, but our sanctions, the only effect of them really is they make the central government that we supposedly oppose more powerful. We put sanctions on Saddam Hussein, and we had an oil for foods program and stuff. And when we did that, he became the sole central source for food, the central government at Saddam Hussein. So if you were a dissident group, if you were, lived in an outlying area that didn't agree with too bad, eat dirt. And if you were supporters of the government and you were loyalists and stuff, then you got, more than your supplement. All these things, they always increase the power of the central government that we are supposedly opposing. It's just madness.
Well, Minnesota, let's pick on Minnesota again, because it's one of the closest states to socialism, moving in that direction. We have the triple sanctuary thing going on with immigration, with transgender, and with abortion. But the immigration, I just was traveling yesterday, and we had an Uber take us home. And he was talking about, thankfully he has another job, but he was talking about how he drives Uber to make a little bit extra money on top of his other job. But he says that this state, Uber pays one of the lowest wages in the country because we have so many drivers here, which because of immigration.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Amazon. Amazon workers get paid, compared to like $25 in most states, they get paid $18 an hour here. So the wages keep lowering because of this immigration sanctuary that the Democrats or whoever's for it, I don't know who's for it. Maybe it's not even the Democrats anymore. It's lowering their standard of living. But at the same time, those people are complaining about the cost of everything. It's like, well, you can't have everything both ways. You have to balance it out and be smart. You can't bring in the people who are willing to work at the lowest wages, saturate the market with that, and then also expect people to be able to meet the demands of the living wages.
When I was on the radio in Phoenix, I remember a caller one day, and we were talking about the immigration problem, and people call up and say, "Well, they're racist if you oppose the immigration problem stuff." Guy called up and he said, "Charles, let me tell you my situation. I frame houses, and I've been framing houses since I was a very young man. And I used to get, and for I think, Sarah, forgive me if I don't get the numbers exactly right because it's been a few years ago, but he said something like, I get, I don't know, $18 an hour, and I've been framing houses, and I used to get 15, and now I'm kind of in charge of the framers, and I get 18. And he said, with $18, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but he said, we have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. My wife and I each have a car. My kids are in school. They're well clothed. They're well fed. We think we're putting away enough money for them to go to college,
Wow.
and we get a vacation every year."
When was
He said,
this? What year?
This is in Phoenix, Arizona. So
But
this
what
is
year?
some years back. Well, like this is probably in the early 2000s.
Wow,
So
just that long ago. Okay.
yeah. So anyway, he says here's what's happened in the last couple of years. He said now, if I were hiring out to frame houses now, I get $6 an hour.
Oh my
So
God.
all my hopes, all of the American dream that my family has worked for and stuff has gone up in smoke. So he said, don't call me a racist, but try to understand the situation that this immigration has put me and my family in, and it makes perfect sense. It's real easy to say everything. Oh, it was immigrants. There must be anti-immigration. They must be racist. You're the cruel people. They hate these kind of people. They hate those kind of people. And the guy's just saying, I've seen my American dream shattered in the last few years. What do you want me to do about it? You want me to sit down and be silent? You want me to encourage more immigration so I can get $4 an hour next year?
So I can't eat and feed my family at all, and we're just bringing in a group of slaves, essentially, and permanently creating a third world country where we have a few wealthy and the rest of the people, and we're just accelerating the need for UBI, universal basic income. We have AI coming on, which I've talked about this before. I've gotten a deep, I have a background in, I'm a computer science engineer. And, when I talk about AI, there's all sorts of stuff about AI that I'm not sure. There's a psyop going on with AI, but it's very real about the legal profession, the software developers. Finance guys, it's all being replaced, and we're going to see this within the next few years accelerate. There's a real deal going on. So on top of having all these immigrants come in, taking up the hand jobs, we're going to have all these lower white collar jobs too being taken. We can't afford immigrants to be here when we have all these white collar jobs going, because they're going to need to feed their family somehow.
It's impacted the residential real estate market, helped to drive prices higher for residences. College kids, post-college kids now can't afford a house. It's a real upheaval in the American economy. And when you get an upheaval in the American economy or any economy, you get an upheaval in the political landscape. So I think we're on the brink of something not necessarily good, but something very, very dramatic.
I think so too. And I was always against universal basic income, right? It kind of goes against my whole ethos, where you don't give things to people because then they don't want to work. It takes away, it sucks their soul from them. It sucks the soul from the country, right? It's really bad to be in a situation where you have universal basic income. The only thing that makes it worse is when nobody has anything and you have to give people some kind of way of surviving. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I'm like, oh my God, there could be a situation where I actually agree with this for at least a transitional period, because it could be actually worse.
Yeah. Well, the universal income in the current situation in the United States is going to be paid for by printed money, because the government has no money. And I like to be very clear. I'm here to talk about, empire of lies, but the foundation of that is the money thing that we're dealing with.
That's right.
And the government has no money. The visible national debt is $38 trillion. It's going to be $40 trillion by, I guess, August. $40 trillion of debt that cannot be paid back. But that is only the iceberg above the waterline. That's the visible debt. But below that is all the hidden debt. And I don't know what it is. It's $200 trillion, but it's promises that the government has made to people for things that they count on. It's Social Security and Medicare. It's retirement for military people. These are all promises that have been made by the government. People absolutely count on the economy. You cut Social Security and you cut retirement pay for veterans and so on. All of a sudden, everything collapses. They don't meet their mortgages. They don't meet their gas payment. They don't meet their electricity bill. Everything collapses. And yet there are no provisions to pay that. Those are unfunded liabilities of the U.S. government. And so in this environment, we spend $1 trillion on war now. That's the military budget. It's actually bigger than that if you count everything. But let's just call it $1 trillion. So 2 weeks ago, President Trump said, even though we spend more on the military than the next, I guess, 8 or 9 nations combined, he said $1 trillion isn't enough. I want a new military budget, a war budget of $1.5 trillion. But we don't have the money. Where does the money come? We used to be able to borrow it. And we'd borrow money from places like, Russia was actually a creditor of the United States, no longer. China was one of our leading creditors. China, a few years ago, Sarah, China had lent the United States. When the government needs to borrow money, they go out and sell U.S. bonds and say, hold this bond 10 years, we'll redeem it, and we'll pay you, 4%. Or
treasuries too, right?
Treasuries.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, China held, I think it was about probably topped out at about $1.4 trillion of U.S. bonds, U.S. government. So they had loaned the American government $1.4 trillion. That's fallen in half now. Everybody's backing away. Everybody knows the United States government is the biggest debtor in the world, and it does not have the, we're going to have $2 trillion deficit just this year. It doesn't have the means.
Oh, I think it's happening all over the world. I just read reports.
Sure
all the governments aren't able to sell their treasuries and their T-bonds and their whatever they are selling. There's like 5 different instruments. They're just not able to do it to cover their debt because people are like, hell with that.
Yeah, and here's what happens. When I want to go buy a new Lamborghini or a new beachfront house, the creditor, the bank, or whoever says, well, Charles, how are you going to pay this back? Here's your income, and here's your assets and stuff. Are you going to have any trouble paying this back? And I kind of lie and I go, oh, no, I won't have any trouble paying that back. But, I have to consider my ability to pay things off when I buy something.
That's right, on a personal basis.
The government doesn't have to do that. They have to have the money. It is existential. If my new Lamborghini is going to, because I'm a bad credit risk, and they say, well, yeah, we'll let you buy that, but we're going to charge 18% because you're risky. You're a risky guy. I said, well, I can't afford 15%. I'm not buying the Lamborghini or the new beachfront. But the government doesn't have to make that calculation. It is existential. It has to have the money to survive. So it will pay anything. And if it has to pay 8%. 10%, 12%, 14%, 18%.
It'll do whatever it has to because the whole thing will collapse. But you know what? You know what's awful is the existential threat of doing what they're doing for year after year after year is turned into the threat, and it's the incompetence, the apathy towards doing what's right has eventually caught up to them, and that's the existential threat now. And it's like we do things because they know the whole system's going to collapse if you don't do certain things, right? So they like you were just explaining. But they ignored the bigger elephant in the room, which created the exact same situation of it being that they can't do anything about. And that's that's where we have to talk about solutions right now, is the fact that, what can people personally do? Because we are in that last day, aren't we? That last hour where they ignored the existential threat for so long, and it turned into, and because they didn't have any provisions for it, because it was a more background threat, and it's no longer a background anymore.
Mañana, tomorrow we can fix it. Tomorrow, mañana, we're going to kick the can down the road. The prevailing ethic in Washington today is, well, I've just got to get through the next election, which means, of course, involves buying votes with money we don't have, buying the affection of the people by giving them things with money that we don't have. And then, maybe someday down the road we'll take care of that. Well, the prospects of taking care of it have gone from slim to none. And at one time, there was a kind of a constituency in the House, for example, of, the budget hawks and wanted to get a handle on the spending and stuff. They failed year after year after year after year. They've always failed, but now they don't even exist. You got 2 or 3 guys, in the entire Congress that are actually serious about getting things. So it's a doom loop scenario. There is no way out as presently constituted. There's no way out. Of course, as you know, there's no way out except printing money. So that
printing money,
the money,
or look at our assets that we can have access to, and then I'm talking if
our
there's
personal assets. You mean
I'm talking like
stealing
major
our assets?
No. There's actually gold reserves and other kinds of assets that I think we get into conspiracy theory land because you can't talk about it. Now we're really going to be called conspiracy theorists because these are, I think it's true, but if you even talk about it, you're talked about it as a conspiracy theorist. But there are some assets that are available. I haven't talked a lot on this show. I've talked about it a couple times with a few people because I've been told that it's dangerous to even talk about it. I had some high-level global intelligence people tell me, Sarah, you can't even talk about that stuff.
When Washington talks about using assets to get a handle on our national debt, the first thing they talk about is real estate, is land, because the federal government owns, 90% of the land in the 9 or 10 or 11 Western states. They almost all the land. So they talk about, well, we can convert that to cash. We can sell that. We can.
No. Yeah.
And of course, what that does to the real estate market.
No, we don't
tanks the you'd start dropping hundreds of millions of acres of land on the American people.
They are talking about some of that, though. They're talking about
it all the time. They come up with all these phony things that they think will work, but they don't look at the secondary effects, the unintended consequences of, you dump $1 million, you dump a couple of million acres of land in Arizona, and all of a sudden the desert land that people are paying a premium for collapses in value because there's so much. It's supply.
Yeah.
A lot more supply just came on the market. None of these schemes of theirs
None of their
work.
schemes. That's because
And
they're
they-
not
and they
willing
revert-
to. They're not even willing to talk to anybody if it takes away their control. That's
Yeah.
the problem. But keep
Yeah.
going. Because there are some solutions that I've heard from some people that actually could work, but they won't even talk to some of these people because they perceive it, and I'm talking the world controllers, they perceive it as losing their control. And if they realize that they're probably going to lose control anyways if they don't get this under, or they're either going to lose control or they're losing the complete trust of everybody in the world. If they move to some of these better solutions, maybe they can have a place at the table and actually do some good negotiations. Instead, they just ignoring people because they want to. They would rather go down with the ship than to actually talk to people that could be real solutions for humanity for another couple hundred years.
Their leveling kind of socialistic view of mankind doesn't allow for any solutions. You will eat bugs, you will own nothing, and you will like it. And this is what they want. It's a massive leveling of society, perhaps except for themselves, except for
except for themselves.
But
let's get that clear. Except they already got themselves taken care of. Go ahead, because they wouldn't do it if they in any other way.
Yeah, and it's so ridiculous on its face that people will put up with this. Somebody told me, it said when the dollar collapses, will come out. They're going to replace it with the International Monetary Fund. What do they call it? I can't remember. Oh, that's some sort of monetary credit thing. And I said, why are the American people, having been defrauded by their own government and the valuelessness of the U.S. dollar, going to suddenly accept some international monetary fund?
We're
currency?
not even.
We're not. Mad.
Well, we don't even vote them in, right? We have the EU was set up in such a way, and this isn't EU, but let's talk about the EU and so people understand the comparison of what the IMF represents. The EU was set up in a way that nobody voted these people in. You have absolutely no control of what they're doing because the voters directly are not voting them in and having any say to what's happening. And so that's like on steroids for the world. So the people, the people who are against this global kind of government they just don't want it to be unelected bureaucrats. And the people who are for it aren't thinking clearly that they have absolutely no power once it's in place and you're totally screwed.
Yeah, well, it's like the Brexit thing. The people in Great Britain vote for Brexit, and what happens? Zero, zip. Nada. I mean, the illusion that we're in charge has got to be shattered at this point because nothing, well, look, most recently we elected a president who was against regime change wars. We've had this constant failure of regime change wars. And so it's been explicit in the last campaign and even before that, no more regime change wars. And that's a platform. And that came all this, but no more regime change wars. And I'm amazed at how fast so many of the MAGA people flip-flopped. All of a sudden, regime change wars. Yeah, let's get Venezuela. Let me tell you something. The deep state has had its eye on regime change in Venezuela for a very long time. 10 years ago, Barack Obama issued an executive order declaring a grave national emergency, a grave national security threat to the American people in the form of the government of Venezuela. Well, they were broke. That was the Chavez Maduro government. They didn't have any money. They couldn't pump any oil. They were broke. They couldn't land 2 rubber boats on the Jersey Shore. They had no military to speak of. I actually went through, and in the book, I detail the size of this massive national security threat that was 10 years ago. So it's like the target has remained on Venezuela and only the pretext has changed. Anybody that wanted to go after fentanyl wouldn't have decided on Venezuela first. They'd have been way down the list. But it's like the new WMD. You want to do war in Iraq, you got to come up with in fact, they had the White House Iraq group come up with an advertising slogan to sell the Iraq war. And it was like, the smoking gun in the form of a mushroom cloud. Well, there were no WMDs. I had people on my show every day, nuclear scientists, people that were weapons inspectors every single day saying, no, that's not true. No, what they've represented about this isn't true. No, this isn't true. And yet they sell it. They find a sales thing like, it's fentanyl. We've got to take over Venezuela. And last week, The president issued another executive order like that, warning us of the grave national security threat. An emergency was implemented by executive order because of the grave national security threat we face from Cuba.
Yeah.
Cuba's
Well,
about as
okay.
Cuba's broke as they can be. They're driving 1955 Chevys. Cuba is broke. The Soviets aren't there. The Soviets don't have missiles. Cuba is broke, and yet it's a grave national security threat. You know what it is? It's another regime change target.
Just a short break from the program to share with you an amazing peptide to help you lose weight. It's stronger than Ozempic. And why? It's because it not only reduces your appetite, but it also burns fat. These other GLP-1s on the market, they do not burn fat. They just reduce your appetite. This one, retatrutide, is stronger. It's considered a next generation peptide because of that. And man, does this work. I've been using it for 2.5 weeks and I've already lost 11 pounds, and I cut my dose in half because I was losing weight too quickly. And that kind of freaked me out, to be honest. And so I also am taking this 5-amino 1MQ in capsule form. This helps by making sure that you lose fat, not muscle. And so in conjunction, I'm using both of these. This will work whether you have this or not. And I am telling you, it's amazing. If you are interested in getting this, I have the link below, or you can go to sarahwestall.com under shop. You can use the coupon code Sarah to save 10%. If you have questions about your own use, you should either consult your doctor or you can join Dr. Diane's tribe. And I have a link below to that. It is only $1 for the first week. You can ask her any question you want and get all your answers to this, how to take an injectable. And there shouldn't be any fear in doing that. It is easy and straightforward. Go to sarahwestall.com under shop or use the link below, and remember to use coupon code Sarah. Well, and okay, let's talk about that. It's some rogue outlets that they want to get control of, but they want to get it from trades and routes and resources routes, the Michael Yon thing. That's very true. So economic hitman comes back into play here. If these people are not playing ball with us from a money and business route standpoint, where we need their resources, we want their alliance so that we can, get the resources and do business trades with them. They obviously, the people that make it out the most are the people who are connected to the central bankers and to the players, the IMF and the World Banks that go in there and fund these operations. And that's why they're going after them, right? They're not playing ball with these guys.
It's the oldest game in the world, and the money center banks and the plutocrats, they have a habit that's as old as history of arming both sides of the conflict. And then when one guy gets a little reluctant to pay him back, they beef up the other guy. They put the pressure on him. This goes on over and over again to keep their creditors in line. We saw something of this in slightly different form in the recent events in Syria. You had the Pentagon arming jihadists, Islamic jihadists in Syria that were fighting with radical Islamic fundamentalists that were armed by the CIA. It's a good deal if you're an arms manufacturer and selling weapons to both sides. It's not so good for the American people.
It's all about controlling the money. Like Michael Yon, he says, he's absolutely right. It's about resources and trade routes, and it's about controlling that so that you can keep the money, keep pumping, so they can have the lifestyle that they want. And to a certain extent, keeping the money flowing helps keep all these economies flowing. But they take it to an extreme, and there's always good things and there's always bad things involved. And it depends on the agendas of the people, right? We need to keep money flowing. We need to keep routes and trade and stuff open. I mean, let's not be naive to this. But at the same standpoint, they take it and exploit it for their own benefit so they can, they take it they do extreme behaviors. And that's what we're talking about.
Well, my view on the trade routes is a little different because the American military is used to shut down trade, not to open trade. The American military is engaged in the oceans around the world, enforcing sanctions and stopping people from trading. And I look at this.
But don't you think it's hold on one second, but don't you think, and I want you to answer this, don't you think it's about they're shutting it down, but they're only shutting down things that affect somebody who's being an enemy of ours while keeping our own routes open? I mean, it's or the routes of the people they serve, whatever that is.
But
Go ahead.
but who wants to shut down the trade in the South China Seas? The Chinese leadership, if they go to sleep at night and have nightmares, I'll tell you what their nightmares are about. Their nightmares are about not being able to keep their billion people employed in the cities to have jobs and to be prosperous, because then they know the revolution starts and their heads will be on the chopping block. So it is in their interest, and they know it, to keep those trade routes open. They got almost all of the things that come and go, exports and imports through the South China Sea, are going and coming from China, and it's keeping the Chinese people fed, and it's keeping the power structure in place.
That's right.
And there will be a crisis when the trade routes are closed. So who wants to close the trade routes? They don't. So Why do we go over there to control the trade routes? All that we do with the trade routes, controlling the trade routes, is enforce sanctions on people.
That's right. Well, it's the blackmail to get people, and both ways. It's the blackmail to get people to do what we need them to do.
Sure.
Whatever the agenda is. Yeah. The entire countries, the people who have decision-making power.
Yeah.
And it comes in all forms. It's not just this trade and route shutting down sanctions and shutting down routes. It comes on personal things like that Jeffrey Epstein thing, where we have leaders who are in positions of power who are blackmailed through sexual type things. It's not just Jeffrey Epstein, that's the tip of the iceberg, but those types of operations that we exert on people of power to do what we need them to do. And I don't say we, it's any direction you're talking, because they do it too. Everybody does it.
Look at the ton of bricks that has fallen on Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie for passing the Jeffrey Epstein disclosure bills. I mean, the president goes to a national prayer breakfast. It's not to pray. He starts off talking about, what a moron Thomas Massie is. We got to get rid of him and stuff. Thomas Massie, the only thing he's ever opposed is, needless American wars that we were lied into, and spending more money than we have, and keeping the Jeffrey Epstein files hidden. But they've come down on him like a ton of bricks. They vilify him more than the worst left-wing, crazed Democratic member of Congress. They let them go by, and they pound Thomas Massie for wanting to disclose the Epstein files and for trying to disclose the truth and have a congressional debate. After all, this Americans get to decide if we go to war. It's in the Constitution. It's the American people's representatives, the Congress, that has the power to make war. Nobody has given the president the power to make war in Iran or Venezuela or Cuba. He does not have the authority because it's lodged in the American people. But those people say, wait a minute, what about the Constitution? It says Congress has the power to declare war. We haven't had a declaration of war since World War II, and yet we have war continually, year in and year out. They have trampled on the Constitution. That's right. And for those that stand up and speak out about it, they get trampled too.
Well, and Massie, I don't know if you know anything, or if you do, it would be great to fill us in. He came out and spoke against Israel. This was back a year from this summer, so it was like a year and a half ago. And like a week after that came out, his wife was dead. And I don't know the whole situation, but I speculate that there was something tied to that. They go after Massie hard. I am going to theorize, and on this theory I don't have proof, that Massie is like, hell with it. I'm going for it. I don't care anymore. You take out one of my family members, I'm here to fight. That's what I'm thinking, but I don't know. Do you have any evidence on any of it?
I know he's here to fight, and he got remarried after his wife died, and married a wonderful woman. I think she'd been a staffer for Rand Paul, who I know, but she was a wonderful woman. They got married, and the president comes out and trashes her as though she's some kind of a trollop. Well, he sure got married quickly after his wife died. Well, it wasn't so quick, matter of fact, But where does that enter? Where does talking about people's private marriages? How does the president's been married 4 times or 3 times or whatever, and has a track record of fidelity about his yay, but how does that become a part of the national conversation from the president to trash his wife as some sort of leftist, even though she voted for him 3 times and she'd worked in the conservative cause with people in Washington for her entire career?
Did he have anything on
ugly.
her?
It's so ugly.
What did he say about? Was there anything on her that they claimed?
No, nothing. She
That's too
said, "Oh,
bad.
he's married some kind of left-wing radical."
Oh, that's too
That's
bad.
about it.
She should be
And
left alone. She should be left
oh,
alone. People,
oh,
personal family members should be left alone. But I think taking out Massey's wife was pretty. I don't have proof on that, but the circumstances is very, very interesting on that.
I don't know
And
anything about it, but
well, the
but
timing was very, very interesting. But it could have been natural. Who knows?
yeah, I just
Timing
don't know.
sometimes can be. But he's but he's not alone. I mean, anybody that fights it. Now, I don't know if I agree with everything Massey does either, but the standpoint that you have to be at risk just for voting in a way that doesn't align with the party, I think that independent thought and independent thinkers is what we're missing in this country. Otherwise, we would be in a better position.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to where we started about free speech.
That's right.
Some people have to have the right of dissent. They have to have the right to make a counter argument, to ask questions, to poke holes, to question representations that are not true. And the government makes representations that are not true every single day. I mean, you look at you know what, sir? I have so many examples. I hardly know where to pick. I want to pick
You could spend hours doing that.
forever. I have a
Forever
whole
doing
book.
that.
I have
And
a
the
whole. I
Smith,
have a whole book about it.
when that people
Just
need to get your book so they can start to see, they need to see the patterns, and especially when it comes to war. But it's endless. How much do you think the Smith-Mudd Act came into play here on changing our country? Because once lies become where you're immune from lying to the American people, like before, you actually had laws in place that you can't lie to the American people. They did it anyways, right?
Yeah.
But now once that law came into place and you can, then the floodgates came open.
And the lapdog press lets them get away with it. To go back to the Iraq War, in fact, just one good example. They're so brazen in their lies. It's as though they have no shame. So there was the story about aluminum tubes, and they had discovered that Saddam Hussein had these aluminum tubes, and these aluminum tubes were going to be used as centrifuges, and it's going to be in his nuclear weapons project. And these aluminum tubes are part of the centrifuges, and this is the final nail in the coffin of his smoking gun in the form of mushroom cloud. This is weapons. So now our own Department of Energy guys that are involved in making centrifuges and nuclear power said, no, those aluminum tubes. They don't work. Those are not even close. They're not suitable. It doesn't fit. It's not part of a deal. It doesn't work. But they cooked up the story in the vice president's office and Dick Cheney's office, and he and Scooter Libby cooked up this story about these aluminum tubes. Now they're the final evidence and so on. Now watch this play. Watch how they did this. So they cook up this story that these aluminum tubes are proof of the weapons of mass destruction. They fed the story to their lapdog press. They fed it to Judith Miller at the New York Times. So she takes their story intact, who incidentally, Judith Miller had been lying to us about the Iraq War the whole time. She was obviously their go-to girl, right? So they take the story. She takes the story about the aluminum tubes from the vice president's office, and it gets slapped on the front page of the New York Times on a Sunday morning. So next phase of the story, Dick Cheney shows up on Meet the Press. Oh, he wanted to go on Meet the Press. His aides pay, his PR people say it's because he can control the narrative on Meet the Press. So that Sunday morning, he shows up on Meet the Press. And he says, these aluminum tubes, smoking gun, mushroom cloud, final evidence. Then he says, but don't take it from me. Here it is on the front page of the New York Times.
Of course.
It's like this complicated triple play. It goes from the deep state to the lapdogs, from the lapdogs
Nancy
back
Pelosi
to the deep
told
state,
us
back
that.
to the
Remember? Nancy Pelosi said it. She goes, "This is how you do it. You create stories by planting them."
Sure. Yeah,
sure. I Akerson talked about it when it comes to the healthcare stuff. How they do this with all the
Oh yeah.
But say, with the studies and things, and they plant and then they point to each other, and then that validates each other. Keep telling your story. This is important for people to understand.
That story stands on its own. That they cook up the story, then they feed it to the compliant press, and then the compliant press is used to feed it back to another compliant press to make the case that was fabricated from the very beginning. I mean, but this stuff goes on all the time. We have, this is a horrendous account of what's happened in Syria. Have we talked about Syria? No. So all of a sudden we had to take out Bashar Assad. I'm not an apologist for Bashar Assad. If North Korea were run as liberally as he ran his country, we'd think it was a modern day miracle. But that's not an excuse for him. I don't like autocrats of any sort. He was better than his dad. His dad was a real authoritarian, but at least Bashar, he let women have the
Yeah.
vote and he let
Yeah.
them drive
Yes.
their cars. And instead of going everywhere in a convoy, he drove himself and he took down all the sycophantic posters of
He
the
was a he was
family.
a
And
good he was an
he was
enlightened
he was
dictator.
yeah, he was an optometrist. He'd been educated in London, so he was. And things got a little worse under him when we put the sanctions in place because they started going
Well,
broke and
yeah.
things got
Yeah.
really bad. But in the meantime, somehow we were persuaded that it was imperative that we get rid of Bashar Assad. Nobody ever made the argument exactly why it was. So we had the situation where the United States and other countries go in to try to subvert the Assad government, to do it under the story I told you about, the CIA funding one faction and the FBI, the Pentagon funding another, and they fight each other, and we're sending weapons to them, and all the Benghazi stuff in Libya, that was all about sending weapons to Syria so we could topple the government. So the dust settles, and at the end of the day, who do we install as the president of Syria? Well, it's a guy's name was Jelani. He was a head chopper. He was an ISIS. He was an
Yeah.
ISIS Al Qaeda affiliate in Iraq. Until last year, the United States State Department had a $10 million bounty on his head
Jeez.
for his
It's just
cruelty, terrorism, and murder. And yet suddenly he got cleaned up. One of my friends, Daniel McAdams, says, faster than you can say Washington makeover. They slapped a $90,000 Patek Philippe watch on him and trimmed his beard, and and made him the great new liberal president of Syria.
it's just crazy. They have no shame.
It's
That's the whole thing.
insane.
They have no shame on what they do and how
None.
they spin people and how
None.
they
And
lie.
the killing goes on, by the way, with our newly installed guy. And actually, you could find out etymologically even what he's up to, because his called Jelani before. Now he's gone back to an earlier name, Al Shara, which basically etymologically means he's there to represent Sharia law. He's an exponent of Sharia. So this is where Syria that protected the rights of different religions, and including Christians and so on, all the different religions were protected more or less, and now it's gone under the thumb of Sharia law and a head chopper that was sponsored by the United States and Israel.
So you want to know what they have blackmail wise, or what kind of coercion, or how that guy got in there, because it's not ever straightforward. There's always something in the background, right? And that, it gets back to the media sources that you were talking about, that one story. It's so important for people to understand that. The reason that authority voices have been propped up is those are, for the most part, the newspapers they can trust to do their narrative for them.
Yeah.
All the rest of anybody who they can't trust to propagate the narrative ends up not being the voices with authority.
The media entities have betrayed us so badly. There's a syndrome that you won't find this in any of the standard psychiatric diagnostic models, but I call it combat envy. And it should be in their diagnostic manuals, because it does a lot of damage to us, and it's more widespread than you could possibly think. I'll give you a couple of quick examples.
Yeah,
Brian
what is
Williams.
this?
Brian Williams got caught lying about his military experiences going into Iraq in the first Iraq War. And when he got caught, he said, maybe I had a brain tumor, as he tries to excuse himself. But he made a story that he embellished with each retelling over and over again about flying in and this corkscrew landing the helicopter had to make, and there were RPGs headed down right into the cockpit and stuff, and it got bigger and better. And finally, after a couple of years, the guys that were on the mission got tired of hearing about it. They went to Stars and Stripes and they told the real story. He wasn't even in the mission that actually took an RPG. He made the whole thing up, and it got worse and worse every year. And what happened to him? Here's major news media. NBC was owned by General Electric at the time. Their job, you hire these news people to explain to us and tell us the truth about things far away and very complicated that they don't understand and we don't, but they're expected to tell the truth. But about the things they know the best, where they were, what they did, they lied to us. Do you think he was fired? No. He was suspended for a couple of weeks or a couple of months and then made anchor on CNBC. This goes on over and over and over again. There was a guy on Fox News for years, and his name was Wayne somebody, and I used to seethe when I watched him because I knew he was lying about everything. But he was a CIA national security veteran and an expert on stuff. And he'd go on there and propose the most crazed military war inventions that would trigger other wars, and they liked him. They liked him because this is, the war is good for the ratings. It's a Fox News alert. And they liked him, and they had him on there for years. And finally, the truth came out. While he was proposing insane things like an American ground invasion of Iran, that's a pretty damn far supply line to try to keep stock. While he was proposing that, we finally learned that he was a hot tub manager and a doorman
Oh,
at a
for
hotel.
gosh sake. See, and those are the voices of authority.
Oh, how about, can I give you another one? They're shocking. I've got so many in the book, but they're all, I'm not trying to damage people's reputation
but this is
by telling
important for people to know this.
It's so important.
And our whole system is based on this.
And the entire networks in the case of like Brian Williams and others, they don't think enough of their viewers to say, well, we're sorry he has a problem, and we're sorry he's got a hole in his psyche that needs to be filled with made-up tales of daring do. But he can't be on our news anymore. We can't trust him. We're not going to feature him on the news.
But instead, but that's because they know that this is what they do. And our whole online ecosystem is based on authority scores, and they're the ones with the authority.
Yeah. It's just,
that's how bad
crazy.
It is. Yeah.
Well, they had, the lead guy on Fox was Bill O'Reilly. You can go on the internet today. You can find a YouTube, Bill O'Reilly talking something kind of bizarre about, well, when I lead my men in battle, this is what I tell them to do. And he was always talking tough like this, his men and this, that, and the other. And he said, well, I've been in war. I was in a war in the Falklands. Bill O'Reilly was never in the Falklands.
Really? So he lied, all that stuff.
Oh, of course, all the time. Let me finish with him, because all the time,
Bill O'Reilly is so arrogant. So I'm not.
Sarah, all the time he lied. How about this one? He said, well, I've seen, in his great tales of, his war maneuvers, I've seen nuns get shot in the head. I guess he was talking about Central America, as El Salvador years ago or something. Well, it turned out, when the truth finally gets its way out, he hadn't seen any such thing. He'd seen photos of this. But, I saw the Zapruder film. Can I go out there? Can I come on your show? Yeah, I'm a personal eyewitness to the assassination of President Kennedy. I mean, it's insane. And speaking of Kennedy, O'Reilly even lied about that. He said he was on. There's a figure in the Kennedy assassination, George de Mohrenschildt, and he supposedly committed suicide in Florida. I think when some of this stuff was closing in on him, or he's having personal financial problems, whatever it was, he is said to have blown his head off, I think, with a shotgun. O'Reilly represents in his book, Killing Kennedy, I haven't read this, but I've been told this by many, many people, represents himself as being on the porch of George de Mohrenschildt when he heard the blast go off.
And
but he wasn't. He wasn't even in the same state. He was in Texas, and they have the telephone records of him working at his TV station in Texas at the time. It's all nonsense. And what does the network do when they catch this guy out? Nothing.
Is this in your book?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, gosh. They have no shame. And I think it's because they just know they're lying all the time. So
they know they're lying.
Meanwhile, other people are getting fired for stupid stuff. So maybe they're getting fired because they want to tell the truth. They actually believed what they learned in journalism school. They actually believe what they're telling the American people, that we tell you the truth, we're doing it. So then they come in, and it's the people who are disillusioned, who are like, what the heck, are the ones who are fired. And the ones that get to stay are the ones that are like, okay, let's go for it. You pay me. I don't care what you guys do. And those are the ones that
they are rewarded too by access. So they have the exclusive interviews with the president, the vice president, the secretary of state. They have the first access to these stories. They get the leaks. They get the front pages. They get the lead on, because they have cultivated access by not saying anything that makes the targets of their reporting uncomfortable.
That's right. I mean, if you do your job for real, even if you come close to even trying to do the job for real, and you may not even be very smart, but you're trying, you are a problem.
Yeah. And I give you an example that's going on today, just about how corrupt the whole media has become. There is a battle right now between for Warner Brothers, that owns CNN, and Warner Brothers is on the chopping block. They're up for sale, and the bidders are Netflix. The other bidder is Paramount that owns CBS. All of the financial press, I follow this one really closely. All of the financial press for the months that this has been going on, they write in their accounts of it. Paramount is owned by David Ellison, who's a supporter of President Trump. So when it comes to regulatory approval of this deal, they've got the heads up. They'll get regulatory approval. The other bidder won't, because they're not friends of Donald Trump. And they write this like it's normal, like graft, connections, influence peddling is the American way of life. And they've got 24 antitrust lawyers in the Justice Department that are supposed to go in there and decide, what's best for the American people, which company should buy Warner Brothers, and what's best for, the entertainment and the viewership and stuff. And they have no clue. The people in the media industry, people that I'm very close to, they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. They stake their lives, their careers, their money on hoping that this will work or this will work. And streamers are gobbling this, and exhibition movies are, down, and everybody's trying to figure out what happens, and nobody really knows. And they're all taking risks and making bets with their money, and some will win, and some will lose. But we're told a handful of dummies in the Justice Department can make the decision of which one would be better for the American people on a game that's changing so fast it's different before they put their pants on in the morning. And besides that, the press tells us, well, Paramount has the lead on this because they're friends, because they've ingratiated themselves with President Trump. How American is that?
Well, I think
it just stinks.
Yeah, I think we've just gotten to the point where none of this, it's been so corrupt for so long. They just say that's part of how we do business. And that's why, syndrome. Yeah. And the American people, the adults in the room need to wake up and take over. That's what I've been saying. The adults in the room with ethics and morals. And this isn't even a partisan thing. This is just, do you have ethics and morals? Hopefully you're a little smarter and you just get involved. I mean, honestly, because that's what's happening is the people have allowed this, but it gets back to free speech too. If you don't know and you have not access to it, the light bulb has been off and you're not turning the light on, you don't even know what is in the corner.
Yeah. No, they have come down on free speech like a ton of bricks too. And we're lucky. I'd say we're lucky that we have X. We're lucky we have a proliferation of, streaming shows. We're lucky that we have podcasts and stuff. It's become a lifeline for people that want to be informed.
That's right. So people need to get a copy of your book, because I think it helps people understand just how deep this goes and how the lies are so and where we're headed, how the lies are just so entrenched in all these different institutions. And it's really important because it helps you plan for yourself. Now, it's important for the people not to get so freaked out where they become fearful and paralyzed. I think that's you do that and it's not even, you might as well just shut all media off and that's better. But if you can read this, it's better to not even know at all and become ignorant if you're going to end up having fear, because fear kills everything. You do stupid things when you're fearful. So this is to be empowered, not to become fearful.
Yeah. Well, if you want to know our trajectory, you want to know where we're going so you can be prepared for it, you got to know where we've been.
That's right.
So they're desperate. And that's actually the subtitle of the book, Empire of Lies, is Fragments from the Memory Hole. And everybody knows from high school, in the book 1984 by George Orwell, there was the Ministry of Love. And the Ministry of Love is where they took you to torture you. Yeah. And there was the Ministry of Truth. And the Ministry of Truth is where they went to rewrite history. So when the alliances changed, or they brought in a guy like al-Shara in Syria and they wanted to clean the slate and not let anybody know that he was a head chopper and had a bounty on his head, it was the job of the Ministry of Truth. And so they would rewrite history, and they take the old historical record, they drop it down the memory hole to be incinerated. This is going on today in America. So if you want to know our trajectory, you've got to recover stuff from the memory hole and know where they have taken us, what they have done, how the game plan works, and where they're headed with this stuff. So that's
have a chance to have an environment that's good. I mean, it's I don't know why this isn't obvious, but we need good people who are willing to tell the truth. Okay, so where can they find the book and where can they follow you? Just
The
on
only place
Amazon?
is on Amazon,
And what is the name of it again so I don't mess
so
it
the
up?
name of the book is Empire of Lies, and I got that title from my friend Ron Paul, and he once coined the expression. He said, "Well, truth is treason in the Empire of Lies." Boy, I loved that. So I grabbed the domain name Empire of Lies like years ago, 10
It's
years ago,
true.
when I heard him say that. But so it's Empire of Lies. Now a lot of detective stories and stuff have popped up called Empire of Lies, but mine is about the political situation. It's called Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole, the stuff that they're disappearing down the memory hole that they don't want you to know, because they don't want you to know where they're taking us. So
That's
that's
right.
it. Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole. And it,
And thank you so
it's a
much for coming
yeah.
because this is important. It's
Yeah, it was a great
important.
conversation. Thank you for having me. I totally
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much.